Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Citizen Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I am the teacher Bronwyn Slate. If you would like to participate live, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Express View channel 972. All of our radio Zoom classes are available live through the Zoom link. So you're welcome to connect with me to get that link, and also your DEC has that link. Our classes are scheduled from Monday through Thursday, 10 to 11 in the morning. And we are in our 6th week of our 9-week course. At this point, you definitely should be submitting work for grading. So a reminder that the key questions are listed at the end of each of your IL lessons. You need to do all of these. Some of them are check your understanding questions, some are activities, and some are review questions. Please explain your thoughts and your ideas in complete sentences and make sure you're actually answering the question that is given. You are welcome to do this by hand or electronically. If you want to, you can write in your workbook. It is yours to keep, make notes, totally fine. But the spaces at the end are rather small. So I strongly encourage you to write on a separate piece of paper to have space to give us complete thoughts. If you're going to do it electronically, PDF, Word, and Google Doc files are the easiest ones for us to open. Everyone has access to Google Doc through their NNEC email address, so you can do that. If you need support to access that, let us know and we can walk you through it. If you need to use a different file type, most likely that is fine. Just let us know and we can make sure that we can open your files. Okay, so how do you submit your work for marking? The first method is to send your work in electronically. You can scan your completed work through a device. If you have an Apple device, the Notes app has a scan function that is fairly straightforward to use, and Android devices have Google Drive app that is also free and has a scan function. Both of these devices generally come with these apps and are fairly straightforward to use, though you can download them for free if you need to. On my YouTube channel, I have, under my tech tutorial playlist, I have videos showing you how to actually scan with both these types of devices and apps, if that would help you. If you do need to just take pictures because you don't have access to these types of devices, no worries. We can totally deal with pictures. Scanning just makes the files smaller to send and a little bit easier to handle, but it's not a big deal to use pictures. Then send them to us at studentwork@nnec.on.ca, and you're going to CC it to John. I no longer am marking for this course. I am just instructing over radio Zoom. So John is your person to connect with in terms of the work being sent and actually marked. His email address is jstradioto@nnec.on.ca. The second method is to drop your work off in Sioux Lookout. We have an outdoor mailbox at our location 74 Front Street. We're the bright red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. We are not yet open to the public, but for now, just put your work into that mailbox and we'll get it back to you as soon as we can. The third method is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. Students are also welcome to send their work in through fax if you have access to a fax machine. You can connect with me through social media if you'd like. Both my Facebook profile and YouTube channel are under the name B Slate Wahsa. If you want to friend me on Facebook and subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll get notifications every time I upload one of our lessons. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and posted to YouTube shortly after airing. I have them on a playlist called SVN3E, so they're really easy to find. Also, under that playlist, there is a sub playlist that is called supplementary videos, and all of our videos that we watch in class are available there as long as they're available on YouTube. So that just links you to their original sources in case you have interest and you want to check out the video again or see what other things that they have on their channels. That's listed there under my supplementary video list. Science is really visual, so I strongly encourage you to access the videos. Just listening to the radio is only going to give you a small portion of the experience. I work to incorporate as many videos, graphics, charts, images, illustrations, things like that to help us really understand the entirety of what's going on in this course. So accessing the videos is going to set you up for the most success. If you cannot join me live through Zoom and are struggling to access the YouTube channel, maybe you don't have reliable internet, which totally happens, let us know and we're happy to send you a copy of the videos so that you can still access and get the full experience. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us here at Wahsa. If you want to talk about the course instruction or anything that is happening in these videos and you want to reach out to me, feel free. My email address is bronwyn.slate, and that's spelled BRONWYN.SLATE at nnec.on.ca. Also, you can connect with me on Facebook, where my name is B Slate Wahsa. You can call me at the office at 807-737-1488. My extension is 2209. And you can also call the toll-free number at 1-800-667-3703. If you want to connect with John about the course being marked, the assignments, your grades, where you send your work, if you have any questions once you received your work, that kind of stuff, connecting directly with John is going to be your best bet. His email address is JSTRADIOTTO@nnec.on.ca. You can get him at the same phone numbers, though his extension is 2210. And his hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., though he takes lunch from 12:30 till 1:30 and is not available at that time. It is important to me that I position myself within the context of this course, as my experience of education shapes how I educate. So I have white settler ancestry, I have white privilege, and this shapes my experience of education, and it means that I have not experienced the same barriers that many other folks have. This is not something that I can change directly, but I do work to disrupt this cycle of oppression and discrimination in the education systems and work to make our classes and courses and instruction more representative of the people in our communities, as well as the perspectives and teaching practices. I value those that are not from a white perspective, but from the wealth of knowledge that other communities and cultures have. I do live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and consistently work to incorporate the culture and knowledge that I can from the people in my community into our course. This is something, as an outsider, I don't fully understand and do not have full access to all of the wealth of knowledge, but I am working to incorporate it as best as I can. As an educator, I have lots to learn and unlearn, and this is a lifelong journey, though I'm committed to be on it in order to improve our education system. Our textbook is Eurocentric. So my experience of it is that it centers the knowledge and the experiences of white people, particularly European descendants, and it ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis, both the knowledges and the experiences of these peoples. This is highly problematic and a disservice to the wealth of knowledge that these communities have. It is something that I've been working on to try to figure out if there's a better resource. I have not yet found one. And when I am not responsible for this course at the end of term 1A, that will be not within my scope of trying to continue to find one. I will have other responsibilities. So I'm not sure if that will happen, but hopefully it's something that Wahsa can commit to continuing to work on and improving. All right, we are in a Throwback Thursday lesson today. We are looking specifically at lessons 11 through 16, though we will go back all the way to our original lessons, our first 10 lessons, to just make sure that we remember what it is that we've talked about. So why are we reviewing already? Why do we keep reviewing in this course? Well, a reminder that the research done by Hermann Ebbinghaus in 1885 showed that we as humans, our brains forget things quickly. So he created or established the forgetting curve, which shows us that in one day after learning something, we forget 20% right away. We only retain 80% after that one day of learning things. If, as we continue and down that curve, after 2 days, we are at between 60 and 70% that we have retained. So we've lost 20 or 30 to 40%, sorry. And as that continues, we continue to lose that information up to where about 7 days after learning something, we now only have retained about 40% of that information. We've lost 60% of that understanding and knowledge. Continuation of that research shows us that if we revisit those topics, we relearn those things, we review those things, that not only do we remember more because we are revisiting, so we're continuing to top up back to 100%, we forget it slower. So the forgetting curve decreases in its steepness. So what we forgot, that 20% that we forgot in that first day, now if we revisit it on the first day, now it's going to take us 2 days to forget that same amount of information. If we revisit again on the third day, now it's going to take us 3 days to forget that 20% of information. And that continues, that if we revisit, then we're going to forget slower and slower and slower in order to be able to retain that information better. This is not through the fault of any student or any individual. This is not because you are not working hard enough or are not invested in what it is that you're learning. It is how our brains work. It's how our brains create space for new information, is that we cannot contain all of the information. We have to forget some things. So by revisiting something means that we are telling our brains that this is important enough for us to be remembering it, even if it's not forever, but for right now, that this is something that you want to invest some of your brain space for. And this is why we review consistently. All right, so what are the highlights of what we have covered? Let's go back all the way to Unit 1. So in Unit 1, we looked at Lesson 1, which was components of soil, water, and air. And this is when we just define what soil, water, and air are, what they're made up of, and how they are the basis of our environment, the basis of our earth, and how they all work interconnectedly. Then in Lesson 2, we looked deeper at soil, water, and air, and particularly looking at the effects of human activity on soil, water, and air. So we talked about how the soil we impact through deforestation, urbanization, erosion, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, industrial chemicals, and how all of those destroy the soil. So all of those things that are a result of our actions degrades and destroys the soil. Then we talked about how recreational, industrial, and everyday activities pollute the water, and how the burning of fossil fuels leads to air pollution and greenhouse gases, which has resulted in detrimental effects on all living things. So we've contributed to the climate crisis because of our use of fossil fuels. Then in Lesson 3, we talked about how we measure this information. So how we know that this is what's happening. So Lesson 3 is called Common Methods of Sampling and Monitoring Soil, Water, and Air. And so we looked at different ways that samples are taken of soil, of water, of air in order to understand how they're changing and understand how we are destroying the soil, understand how we are polluting the water, understanding how the gases that are now in the air, where they come from, and how that has an environmental impact and contributes to the climate crisis and impacts our air quality. All of those things we know because we have been taking samples of the soil, of the water, of the air, and measuring the elements, measuring the components of those things, and then watering it, returning it, writing that information down, and coming back to it later in order to see how things are changing. And then that was unit 1. So now unit 2, we started looking at ecosystems. So in lesson 4, we talked about the cycling of substances in ecosystems. So how everything in ecosystems are interconnected and depend upon each other. They depend upon the cycle of each other. So we looked at what it means to be a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer, and how producers take natural elements like sunlight, water, nutrients in soil, and are able to grow. So these are plants. And then consumers are take the producers and consume them. So these generally are animals and insects, things like that, because consumers not only consume producers, but also consume consumers. And so get their energy and what they need to grow and thrive from the energy that either they get from directly from producers or that they get from consumers who already consumed the producers. And then the last part of the cycle are the decomposers, and the decomposers are the bacteria, fungi, partially scavengers who decompose the dead material either from the producers or the consumers and return the nutrients back to the soil, back to the cycle so that they can be reused through the soil and used again by the producers, which is how this cycle are interconnected and sustain and means that all of these things can thrive as long as everything stays in balance. Specifically, we looked at the interconnected cycles of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, just to see how these all go through these systems. And then we looked at biosolids to see how humans are terrible. We are not producers. We can't take our energy from the natural elements. We can't grow based on sunlight and soil. Water helps us, but we are consumers. 100% humans are consumers. So we're dependent on producers to create the fuel that we need. And we are not decomposers. We cannot return things naturally to the earth. We are really bad at decomposing. I mean, ourselves, obviously, we can't decompose, but also in terms of the waste that we make, we just end up adding more and more waste. All of our materials, our plastics, our metals, our paper, our glass, all of these things, though we recycle them, they still create waste. And we cannot decompose those to be able to extract the nutrients and the elements within them to be able to return that back to the soil and to be used by the producers again. So with biosolids, this is one method that humans are investigating and researching to see if we are able to extract the useful nutrients and return those to the soil from our waste, from our feces. So this is one way that we're trying to learn how to be better decomposers so that we can return these nutrients back to the soil and be part of making a sustainable way of impacting our soil. There are concerns in terms of what else is in our wastewater and biosolids. So are there heavy metals? Are there drugs or pharmaceuticals? are what are the things that are in there and what are we also contributing back into the soil. So we are not just contributing the elements that the natural nutrients that we hope, but what else has been built up in that. And so how can we make sure that we're making safe choices? So that's all what we looked at in lesson 4. In lesson 5, we then looked at carbon footprints and how they measure the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced either by an individual or by a country or community. We talked about how climate justice shows the injustice of the fact that the white minority globally, so around the entire world, white people are the minority, yet white people are the folks who have the most power and the most wealth and are contributing the most amount of emissions to the environment. So we are having the greatest impact based on our lifestyles on the environment. Whereas the global majority, so the people who are not white, which are the majority of people in the world, are not only producing less emissions and having a smaller impact on the climate crisis, but also are experiencing the most detrimental effects of the climate crisis. So these people are the ones who are being climate refugees because their communities are being destroyed by floods or by tsunamis or by droughts, by rising ocean levels. These sorts of things are impacting the global majority much more significantly than the white minority. Yet the global majority have the less of an impact on the climate crisis and have less of an ability to make change because they are already not the ones who are contributing the most to the emissions that are creating the climate crisis. So we looked at this injustice and how that is something to be aware of and concerned about, and how do we change that imbalance. From there, we looked at how reducing carbon footprints is not only an individual action, but a structural change that needs to happen. So though each of us can choose if we're going to walk to work more, or we're going to eat less red meat, or we're going to turn off our lights more consistently in our homes. Yes, these are all things that have an impact on conserving energy and reducing our carbon footprints, but it is also important to hold the governments and industries and companies responsible, as if places if we stopped buying toothpaste that comes in boxes, then that box just gets thrown out, then eventually companies would stop buying or stop making those cardboard boxes just for the sake of cardboard boxes, just a sake for that packaging that isn't actually needed. That's one random example, but structural change has to come from a organization, from an institutional, from a government level, because though individuals can make that choice and we can influence the decisions of the people in power, we cannot actually change them without the people in power actually changing. That is a decision that they need to make. So with our voting, with our actions, with where we spend our money, with who we support, these are ways that we can impact structural change in order to combat the climate crisis. And then in lesson 6, we looked at oil spills. We were talking about how human activity affects the ecosystem. So we looked at oil spills, acid precipitation, and how both these things are results of human activity and what the detrimental impacts they have on the ecosystems, both land and water, plants and animals. And then we talked about how recovery can happen and the amount of work and time that needs to go into it in order for these ecosystems to return back to thriving environments. And then we looked at lesson 7, invasive species, the effects and monitoring and control. How do we make sure that invasive species from other places in the world do not impact our ecosystems because they are introduced to a place where they can thrive and kill out other similar species that need the same habitat or food that they do. So we understood what native species, non-native species, and invasive species are. We talked about how we can monitor the environments in order to make sure that we have a plan for dealing with species that might be introduced into an environment. And we talked about control, specifically that our first line of defense is prevention, making sure that we are not introducing invasive species into our ecosystems. Then early detection and elimination being the second step, in terms of the fact that if something does show up, if we can figure it out that it's there first and eliminating it before it spreads too much, then there's hope for that we can eradicate it. If that is unable to happen, then how to contain the invasive species and manage them so that they don't explode and take over the ecosystems. And then how we can restore ecosystems back to their natural, healthy ways. Then in Unit 3, we talked about Lesson 8, where we have common environmental factors. So we had air pollution, light pollution, noise pollution, soil and water pollution, how all of these, we looked a little bit more in detail about where this pollution comes and how the impacts that they have on people. So then we talked about how these very environmental factors from the pollution that we just discussed in Lesson 9, we talked about how they enter the body. So first we talked about what our systems are. We looked at our respiratory system, our digestive system, our skin, and our circulatory system. So how those systems actually function, to understand in a healthy way how they work in ways that we do need them to work, because this is how we survive and thrive. But that our bodies can only defend against small amounts of contaminants, and the same way that our body takes in the good things that we need, they also take in toxins if they're in an environment. And so that this adds to our systems becoming dysfunctional, and then we lose those defenses and we cannot keep ourselves safe or healthy. Then in Lesson 10, we looked at how the body reacts to environmental factors. And so once those contaminants have come into our bodies, how do they react and what diseases are developed because those toxins are in our body? So again, we looked at various body systems, and we talked about the impact of various contaminants on those systems and what diseases and symptoms develop because of them. All right, so then looking specifically at the newer material, in Lesson 11, we talked about the medical and non-medical ways to protect yourself from environmental factors. So continuing on this track of figuring out how to protect our bodies from these toxins in our environments that we have put there. So we talked about medical protections, which we looked at how vaccines and medications both work and how they protect your body. We had some great videos that really showed us that vaccines, though they are introducing small amounts of viruses that we are learning to protect our bodies against, that is how our bodies, by being exposed to a small controlled amount or dead or weakened amount of a virus, means that our bodies can learn how to protect them from those illnesses, and then how medications actually pinpoint and deal with ailments that we have. Then we also looked at non-medical protections in terms of things like sunscreen, sun protective clothing, respirators, and hearing protection. So how we can protect our skin, our breathing, our respiratory system, our lungs, and our hearing, our ears, when we are exposed, when we're in situations where we have to be exposed to toxins, or going outside, how we can protect our body, what are the various things that we can do in order to live our lives but protect our bodies. In lesson 12, we continued on this track about how we can protect our bodies, looking at personal hygiene and household cleaners, and how we can, here we look specifically in terms of what we need to do, again, personally in our daily lives to protect our bodies. So first we looked at hand washing and spent a lot of time really looking at the details and why hand washing effectively makes such a huge difference. So that we need soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And we looked at why less that time, why no soap, what actually happens. And that you need to scrub between your fingers, under your nails, and the front and backs of your hands. That these are the crevices, the places that people don't wash necessarily as well, or don't get washed as consistently, and that they can still have germs and bacteria there. Then we looked at food safety and how we can be safe within our homes because food-borne illnesses account for over 11,500 hospitalizations and 240 deaths per year. So if we are careful with our food and are able to avoid the bacteria growth in our personal environments, then this can cut down on those hospitalizations, which means that opens up for other things that are less likely that we are not able to control as much, and just means that we have less deaths, which is generally our goal. Using the 4 steps of clean, separate, cook, and chill is how to keep your food safe and your workspace safe and yourself safe. So go back to that lesson if you don't remember what those are and look about how we can clean our food and our areas really well. We keep our food separate that could be contaminated. So we keep raw meat particularly separate from everything else. How we need to cook everything to proper internal temperatures to make sure things are really cooked, and therefore any bacteria that were on those food items is gone. And then we also need to chill our food after anything is being stored. We need to chill it to an appropriate temperature because bacteria grows really quickly in warm environments. And then also within our households, we looked at indoor air quality and how the quality of air inside of our homes and our works is significantly less healthy than the air outside of our homes, just because things are contained. So we looked at both the biological and chemical factors that are contributing to our lower levels of air quality and how we can prevent and clean our air through source control. So making sure things at the original source are not emitting a lot of pollutants into our air, having proper ventilation so that air can cycle through our environments, and that air cleaning, so air purifiers, is a last step, a last option, as it only does so much. Yes, it is worthwhile to include, but it only does so much. It is not the first line of our defense. Then we moved on to the next unit, which was, so in lesson 13, looking at renewable and non-renewable energy sources. So non-renewable energy sources, we've talked about extensively, but reminder that they are the fossil fuels that we both depend on and also are depleting. And these are things like coal, crude oil, natural gas, and nuclear power. So much of our energy sources are from there, and we talked about how these are extracted from the earth. And then we talked about and we explored what are various renewable energy sources, looking at hydroelectric, which the majority of our electricity in Ontario is from hydroelectric, solar, wind, tidal, geothermal, biomass, and hydrogen fuel cells are all other examples of renewable energy sources that here in Ontario we use. Many of them to a certain degree, though they all could be extended and invested in. In lesson 14, we looked at the costs and benefits of using these different energy sources. We looked at how with natural gas and nuclear, we already have an infrastructure. So we've already invested much time, energy, and materials into setting up these systems to provide us with energy. So we've already invested, we already have put that in, and we get a high energy return from these fossil fuels, from these non-renewable sources. So we get a lot of energy for a little bit of amount of work that we need to put in because we've already put in a lot of work. But they have high levels of pollutants and waste, and this means, and also because their fossil fuels are depleting, so they cannot, it's not sustainable. We're not going to be able to have these forever. So looking 7 generations in the future, if we continue on the track that we are, it's most likely that they will not have these options. Nuclear, we talked about being a complicated option or complicated thing to consider, because though there are many negative elements, there's also some really strong positive elements, and that with more research and development, it's potential to be a really good option for the short term, and figuring out how to use radioactive material that is more readily available, and how to figure and has less waste, and how to figure out how to store that waste in a safe way, or deal with the waste in a way that means that we are not having an environmental impact. It might be a really great option. So it's something that we need to continue to learn about and figure out how it could really support us. Then we looked at wind and hydro and how they have no emissions or waste. So those are really great benefits, as they're not contributing to the climate crisis in any way, but that they need a large initial financial investment. We do not have the infrastructure to set up in order to have a lot of energy taken from these types of renewable resources. And we also don't get as much energy return as we do from fossil fuels. So having to put in a lot of financial and person power into developing these methods of energy development or sources is hard when you don't get as much back from what we already have set up. So that's why it's a little bit tricky. And then we looked at biofuels and how they're kind of more renewable than fossil fuels, because we can quickly we can grow them. So because they're based on biomaterials, and that they do have less emissions, though they have some emissions. They are able to use the infrastructure that we already have, so that's beneficial. But that the fact that we're using food when we already potentially have food crises around the world, is this really ethical to use food as fuel for the wealthy when many folks who live in poverty do not have enough food to eat on a daily basis? So is this really an ethical choice to do as a society, as a global society as a whole? Then lesson 15, the highlights. We talked about conserving energy. So first, we just learned about the measures of energy, the units. So remember newtons, joules, watts, kilowatt hours, British thermal units. We understood what those were. And then we looked at energy conservation methods. So we talked about what we can do with light bulbs, energy star appliances, thermostats, and windows, how these small changes there are things that we can make at an individual level that can conserve energy. And then we can also choose to conserve energy by using renewable energy, by partaking in government incentive programs, and with electricity, looking specifically at variable pricing options and using the majority of your energy use during off-peak hours, as there's more electricity that is being available. And then finally, we looked at lesson 16, which started a new unit, which is protecting the environment at work. And we talked about the 4 R's, the reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover, and why they are all important, but why it is best to do them in that order in order to maximize our minimize our impact on the environment. Then we talked about procedures, practices, and protocols in terms of how at work you can actually make these things normal and easy to follow through, and how procedures are steps that are followed to reach goals or results. Practices come from following procedures regularly, and protocols are accepted plans that describe how to reach goals and meet challenges. So, in terms of how to improve the environmental impact of your workplace, these are how you can, the steps that you can go through in order to make changes. And that is what we have covered so far. So, that is a lot. Definitely a significant amount of material that we've gone through already this term. But as we are wrapping up our 6th week, we are 2/3 of the way through the course and really only have 2 more weeks of new material before we review to make sure that we cover everything that we've done so far. So we are a significant way through the course, and that is why we've covered a lot. So let's quickly go through the key questions associated with lessons 11 through 16 to just make sure that we understand what the questions are asking. So on starting with lesson 11, starting on page 88, the check your understanding questions are really fairly straightforward. They're not too confusing. I'm just going to go through the questions to look to make sure that we can understand what the questions are asking. That is my primary goal, opposed to answering the questions for you. So on page 91, I think those questions are straightforward. And then the review questions on page 93. So number one, looking at the figure 3.24 in your workbooks, you actually need to go and look at that chart to answer this question. Honestly, I don't remember if the workbook tells us when the last case of polio was reported in Canada, but it is something that it probably is outdated. Potentially there have been more recent cases reported in Canada, so that might be something worth just researching, just doing an internet search, pretty straightforward. These we've all sort of talked about in our lessons. Just making sure that so on number 13, where it says on a separate sheet of paper, illustrate in a poster or other graphic form the advantages and disadvantages of using earplugs and earmuffs. So this is like making an infographic. I am not a visual artist. I cannot draw for the life of me. It's not where my strengths lie. But you can use like an online system. There's lots of different online tools that are for free that you can organize information that makes it visually appealing in order to get a message through. So feel free to use digital electronic tools opposed to just having to feel like you have to draw. If also we are not evaluating you on your art skills. Totally fine. It's about just sort of creating information and providing it in ways that are accessible so that that information can get carried through. All right, then lesson 12. Check your understanding questions on page 98 are straightforward. And then the review questions on page 101. So again, let's see. These questions all so far are fairly straightforward. Yeah, those questions are all fairly straightforward, direct knowledge-based questions. So hopefully make sense. Then in lesson 13, check your understanding questions on 104. Also straightforward questions. And on 105, also straightforward questions. The review questions are on page 109, and there's only 1 through 7. They're not very many. But again, these are direct questions. On page 112 for lesson 14, the check understanding questions are straightforward, and on page 114 are straightforward direct questions. So some of this information is outdated for the review questions on page 117 for lesson 14. So like number 2 is where it says, why is the Ontario government trying to close all coal-fired power plants by 2014? So they have closed them all by 2014, but you can still answer the question in terms of why that was important. And then what would the percentage increase of energy production from other energy sources if there are no coal-fired plants by 2015? Again, how is that shifted? So use the information that is in the textbook, even though it is outdated, as we are obviously past 2014 and 2015 and things have changed. Here for number 6, where it says explain what you believe is the biggest disadvantage of generating electricity from nuclear power. This key part here is what you believe. So the key with this is that you can believe whatever you want to believe, but you need to back it up. So you need to say, I believe the biggest disadvantage of generating electricity from nuclear power is blah, because blah, 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 blah. It is okay if 2 students or 5 students have completely different answers, as long as you back up your answer. You're allowed to have your own opinion, but you need to back it up. Also, I would strongly encourage you not to say that you don't think there's any disadvantages of generating electricity from nuclear power, as we've gone extensively through how there are both pros and cons. So nothing is perfect. So don't think that that is an easy way to answer this question. Just saying, well, I don't believe there are any disadvantages. That's not going to get you any marks. So that isn't engaging with the conversation. Do a little bit of a deeper reflection. I think these ones are all straightforward. In question 14, it says, if a truck uses 100 liters of fuel each week, what would the monthly cost of running the truck using petroleum diesel and for using biodiesel? Use the costs on table 4.1 and assume 1 month it has 4 weeks. So follow the instructions of this really closely. They tell you how they want you to calculate this, basically using the information that is given, and what assumptions you need to make. All right, for key questions for lesson 15, the check understanding questions on page 119. Again, these are talking about the energy measures of units of measure. So we went over this extensively in our lesson, and I believe it's fairly straightforward in your workbook. So this isn't like something that you need to have memorized, but just understanding it helps you understand the other things that we're talking about. The questions on page 121 are also straightforward direct questions, and on page 123 also straightforward direct questions, and on page 124 so this one's a little bit tricky because it says, how do you think your lifestyle could be affected with time of use pricing for electricity? As time of use pricing is already in effect, you can think about how you actually pay attention to that, if you do or if you don't, and what the impacts might be. So instead of thinking about it something that hasn't happened and is going to happen, just reflect upon it as it already is in place. Then we review questions on page 125. These questions Remember, number 3, compare and contrast standard incandescent light bulbs and compact fluorescent light bulbs. Compare and contrast means what is similar and what is different. And here, 16, so unless, sorry, question 7 says, look at figure 4.21. How much more energy in megawatts is used at 1600 hours in the summer compared to the winter? So remember, 1600 hours, this is military time. And so in terms of what time that actually means, if you subtract 12 hours to subtract the morning, you get 4 p.m. So we're talking about 4 p.m. Was what 1600 hours are. If you don't remember, feel free to look it up. Totally fine. And number 8, when it says, why do you think Canadians use so much more energy than other people in other countries? Again, why you think, totally you're allowed to have your opinion, but back it up. You need to give reasons opposed to just listing off random thoughts. You need to back up you need to justify what your thoughts are in order to give a full, complete answer. And then for lesson 16, the check your understanding questions on page 129 are straightforward. On 132 are straightforward. And then the review questions on page 135 are, looks like they're straightforward. Yeah, there are straightforward. So that is our review for today. A reminder that you are welcome to contact me if you have any questions about the course material at all. You can email me at bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, and you can call me both at the local number and the toll-free number, which is 1-800-667-3703. My extension is 2209. All of our lessons are on YouTube, where my channel is B Slate Wahsa, and they're all under the playlist called SVN3E. So you can find everything that we've talked about today, and there are more detailed lessons. All of that information is there and readily available. If you have any problems trying to access any of it, let me know, and I'm happy to support you to walk through it. If you want to connect with John, who is the course marker, remember his email address is jstradiotto@nnec.on.ca. You can call him at the toll-free number as well as the local number, which is 807-737-1488, and his extension is 2210. He's available in the office from Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., though he takes lunch from 12:30 to 1:30, and he does teach throughout the day. So if you aren't able to get him on the phone, it's very likely that he is on air. So just leave a message and he'll get back to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this review was useful, and congrats on making it this far through the course. Take care. Miigwech.